Crystal, so just checking there that you can hear okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen, thanks very much, guys, for joining. So it's just a short presentation today about COVID-19, its impact on the NI economy, and how we're beginning to reach for recovery as we get into the summer. So over the last number of months, we've seen about 10 million cases of COVID, and so far 500,000 deaths. So a death rate of about 5%, and the US, they're very, very much out on its own, the most impacted country. And if you look at the stats for the US at the minute, unfortunately, there's a second wave working its way through. So Brazil as well in second place now, and the UK has been knocked back into third. Still an invidious place to be in terms of a European context, but well behind Brazil and certainly the US. If we look at the COVID-19 crisis across the world, you can see the lines here where the cases are doubling. So the doubling rates are slowing down, but you can see the massive increase in cases across the world. So we're still not out of the woods with the pandemic, and it is increasing across the world. If we look at Northern Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, you can see here that we probably have the worst. We've passed the worst of the peak. That said, we're not out of the woods yet, and there's still about 17 deaths over the last week in Northern Ireland. So there'll be new figures out in the middle of this week, which will compare figures across the different countries, and we'll be able to update that to a more recent perspective. But still, there are deaths, there is transmission within the community. So whilst the number of deaths has decreased, it's certainly not over just yet. So in terms of the global economic impact, what you can see here is that the forecasts have decreased as time has gone on. So during March, we were forecasting slight growth. And then through April, May, and June, as time went on and the crisis unfolded across the world, the global economic forecasts have become slightly more bleak. So from an average of 2 or 3% down to an average of 5 or 6% now, being shaved off the size of the global economy. If you look at national forecasts, excuse me, the UK is expected to be hit reasonably hard. So again, as you would expect, a reasonably significant healthcare crisis, followed up by a reasonably significant reduction in the size of the economy. Ireland, sort of mid-table there, so 78%, and these are for a single or a double hit recession as a result of COVID. So the UK expected to contract by about 12% to 14% on a first or stroke second wave basis, and Ireland then in around 7 or 8%. So a significant reduction in the size of the economy. So that's quite a big shock. And if you look here at how the recession unfolds, the economy is effectively made up of how consumers purchase and consume goods, how businesses invest, what government spends, and then the trade balance, that's net exports. Here in the UK and Northern Ireland, we've expected that consumption will decline significantly by about 10 or 11%, and the OECD expects the same for the UK. Investment from businesses as well, a market decline, and then government expenditure across the piece increases to try and plug the gap as the economy contracts. So that's right and proper. As the economy begins to contract, government really should pick up the tab and try and boost the economy by spending. Sort of, those are Keynesian surpluses or Keynesian injections, as we would call them. In terms of forecasts, forecasts for Northern Ireland range from about -6.7 right through to -12 or 13%. So you can see here that they're reasonably pessimistic. This is an unusual recession in that it's unfolded in one quarter. The 2008 recession took about 5 quarters to unfold in Northern Ireland. So this is very, very deep and very rapid in Northern Ireland, and quite different to any recession that we've seen in the past. However, there are good signs. So there are signs of reignition in the economy as people begin to return to work. So across the UK, areas like water supply, professional, scientific, and technical didn't really necessarily shut down as a result of the crisis. They changed how they worked and worked from home. If you move to the right of the chart, arts, entertainment, and recreation, accommodation and food services, so restaurants and hotels, and construction, The last two have declined by quite a bit, and we don't expect them to open up just as quickly as other sectors, as people are concerned about how and when they can return to eating in restaurants and going to theatres and all of that sort of thing. So I think we'll have to get used to working in a new normal and living in the 90% economy, where capacity issues are a bit lower than maybe they were pre-COVID. If we look at retail sales, they've bounced back a bit in May. So you can see here from the low in April and a little bit of a bounce back, but not quite back to where they were pre-COVID. So quite a bit further to go. A good thing that Invest and I has been able to share with us is the number of people who are on furlough has been reducing over the last number of weeks. So you can see here the dark blue line decreasing as we go, and then the green line, those are people going back to work. Unfortunately, there are some redundancies, and we don't expect everybody who's on furlough to return to work. But as you can see there, as the scheme is closed to new entrants, then you can see it beginning to flatten out in Northern Ireland. So there's about 212,000 on furlough in Northern Ireland. And I think Invest and I companies, there's about 1,500 companies make up that sample, and they account for about 20% of the total furlough sample. Traffic rates are getting back to normal. So you can see here that pretty much they're back to where the lockdown date was. But you can see an informal lockdown effectively beginning to happen a couple of weeks before the formal lockdown in early March. So a bit of a steady upward trend, and people are beginning to move about, although that might be more for leisure rather than work in many instances, as you can see the weekend spikes. Retail footfall is pretty similar across the piece, so it's increasing across Northern Ireland, and very similar patterns for all council areas. Retail footfall here you can see again as the economy opened up a little bit. You can see a bit of a spike there in Belfast and other areas as the people began to return to shopping. Certainly in the city centre, when we got 1 or 2 days of retailers being more able to open. In terms of shipping, there's a bit of a rising tide as well. So you can see a low and a plateau in April, and that's followed by a bit of an uptick in May and June. So they're edging up, and they're back to about 80% or 85% of pre-crisis volumes. So shipping's an important indicator. So a lot of our goods and services are brought in through a lot of those ferry routes. So all of your stock that's in shops, your timber, steel, grain, all of those sorts of commodities coming in through ports, and those are important leading indicators. Again, heavy goods vehicle movements are on a bit of an upward trend. So you can see here, there's not really much of a difference between the trends in rigid or articulated trailers. But again, HGV movements across Northern Ireland have been on the uptick really since April. So these are unprecedented times, and that calls for an unprecedented policy response. If we look at the UK, it's about 25% of output that's been devoted to pure fiscal liquidity and deferral measures as a response to COVID. Germany and Italy way out on their own in terms of the size of the response, but a massive response for Northern Ireland and the UK in terms of the fiscal response. So that's going to take borrowing up to about 100% of output this year, and that's quite worrying for some people. But if we look back historically, borrowing was higher in the 60s and 50s. So we have precedents for those levels of public borrowing in the past. If we look at the number of people who are on the coronavirus job retention scheme, this is the furlough scheme, so about 212,000 people have been furloughed in Northern Ireland. So that's a quarter of all employees. So a very significant support from the government in terms of keeping people in contact with the companies. The aim here is to keep people employed and with the company, and that they don't go onto the unemployment register, and then the companies have the recruitment costs of getting people back into employment and retraining and recruiting and all of those sorts of costs that are additional to businesses. Again, Ards and North Down is the least impacted. Mid-Ulster is the most impacted. You would expect that because the likes of Mid-Ulster has a very high proportion of manufacturing employees. Uri, Mourne and Down, Causeway Coast and Glens, more because of tourism, hospitality and restaurants and hotels, that sort of stuff. And Mid and East Antrim, again, that's a manufacturing base as well. So areas where there's more tourism or manufacturing and retail tend to have been hit hardest by those going on the job retention scheme. Self-employment's pretty similar, so Newry Morning Down is again one of the highest. Belfast, interestingly, is higher again than maybe other areas. So self-employment in Belfast certainly been hit slightly harder. So again, about half of people who are in self-employment have claimed, and the average value here is about £2,900. The public spending impact has been massive. So an extra 1.3 billion has been spent by the departments in Northern Ireland to try and deal with the COVID crisis. So again, that's a massive shot in the arm for public spending in Northern Ireland. In terms of what the UK schemes have offered and been spent in Northern Ireland, I think there's about 41 billion spent in the UK. And when we look at what the share is for Northern Ireland, we've got figures for the self-employment and job retention schemes. Those are from HMRC. But the top four, we've estimated those as a share of the UK. So we estimate that there's about 1.5 billion been spent by the UK in Northern Ireland, in addition to the 1.3 billion of support that was allocated directly to the executive. So if we look at the profile of spending over time, it was on an increasing trend anyway, but really over this year, we're going to see a massive increase in public spending. So up from about 24 billion to 27.5 billion. So that's an increase of about £1,800 per person, or I think 16-17% in nominal terms. So quite a large increase in public spending, and that again will help us get through the recession. And if you look at what the government's spending its money on, so if we take those who are working in the private sector normally, so that's about 30% of the working age population at the minute. 17% are furloughed. We've got 22% working in the public sector, 6% unemployed, 3% retired, 8% long-term sick and disabled. And if you look at the welfare spending or the supports from government, really from furlough round to the left, about 50% of the working age population are currently being paid or supported by the government in Northern Ireland. So quite a significant and unusual support at this point in time. DFE has announced it's rebuilding a stronger economy strategy. So that really focuses on creating higher paying jobs, addressing skills gaps and regional imbalances. So again, the key actions in terms of the skills strategy, supporting viable businesses, making sure that we're connected in terms of air and tourism, and a new clean energy strategy and agri-food recovery. So again, things that we would have seen prior to the recession and COVID, but really sort of redoubling the efforts in around those to try and grow the economy. July is going to be a bit of a worrying month, as is October, because you can see here that there are policy cliff edges. So a lot of the DFE funds end in July, a number of the DOF rates supports end in July as well. And then across the UK, the likes of bounce back loans, those sorts of things, they begin to wind down in July. And the likes of the coronavirus job retention scheme, it tapers down to October. So again, we need to see what happens in the policy environment, but we would expect that when we get to July or October, that's when we'll see people beginning to be made redundant or join the unemployment register as well. So those are quite worrying times. Also in June, there's about 25,000 kids leaving the education system. So as they leave education from school, further higher education this month, it's going to be tough for them to get jobs or even stopgap jobs across the piece in terms of retail, restaurants, hotels, and also options for them to take gap years or travel as well has been significantly reduced. So how have our behaviours changed over the last couple of months? The answer is they've changed quite significantly. So here you can see what are the traditional psychological patterns amongst populations during disasters. So you have the pre-disaster deterioration in an emotional state where people are worried about lockdown and what's going to happen. Then you have the heroic response where we all clap for the NHS and all of those sorts of things. And a bit of the honeymoon ends and we get into a bit of a disillusionment phase. And then we begin to focus on reconstruction. So again, I think we're probably somewhere between disillusionment and reconstruction in Northern Ireland as we begin to focus on how we can reopen the economy and deal with all the things that have happened. In terms of presence in the workforce, again, you can see here that people have changed how and where they work. So particularly in around Belfast and the commuting areas, people have been working from home. So again, the Google mobility trends will illustrate that. If you look at who is working online and what we do, so we've behaved quite differently. We're shopping online, we're using video calling, We're using video conferencing, we're buying food and deliveries, everything online at the minute. So our consumption patterns have changed markedly. Consumption's down by maybe 20% in total in Northern Ireland, but realistically, face-to-face shopping is down by 60%, and online shopping is actually up by about 20%. So more or less, the change in patterns and how we consume and trade really will impact the high street going forward, because it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to change a behaviour, and so far we've had 12 to 14 weeks of that different behaviour, so we don't expect it all to move back. In terms of air quality, you can see in around Belfast, air quality has improved markedly across the piece, as you might expect with reduced traffic. And then also, when we look at when things reopen, what are we willing to do? Where would we like to go? So again, we're willing to go to places like country parks or open air museums where we're not crammed in on top of other people, but we're less willing to go to areas where, say, for example, enclosed space means that you're up close and personal with other people. So likes of concerts and things like that might be a challenge for a number of months to come. Again, if we look at tourism and tourist types, so heritage centres, visitor centres, parks, we have a lot of external visitors from outside Northern Ireland that go to these areas and support them. So anyone that works in those sectors, obviously, I think will be concerned for how the next few months will begin to shape up. There is enthusiasm for staycations. So again, probably better than no holiday at all, but almost a third will do that. And a third say they already do staycations as well. So, probably some way to plug the gap from people working or people holidaying in Northern Ireland across the piece. So again, consumers, what are we doing? We're spending a lot less. You can see the consumer net lending has decreased markedly. So what the bank economists are telling us is that people are paying off credit card debt, they're paying off other forms of debt, and they're not borrowing to fund other types of spending. That's different to businesses, where we've seen quite a sharp increase in unsecured debt as they maybe struggle with cash flow initially. So the consumer and the business perspectives are quite different. In terms of vacancies, again, as you might expect, fewer companies are hiring. So there's always some job opportunities out there, but as the number of job opportunities drops off, there's less opportunity to change job or get employment. So you can see the sort of pre-March sort of 400 to 900 postings per day, and then back down to maybe in around 100 to 200 across the piece since we've had lockdown. Reductions being across all occupations, so even healthcare, including nursing, has seen a reduction in terms of job postings by sector. So as you can see out in the right, performing arts, personal services, arts and agriculture and horticulture, very few jobs have been posted over the last number of months, but they're down about really 3/4 since lockdown. Unfortunately, we've also begun to see a number of redundancies. So some of our larger companies, Bombardier, Thomson Aerospace, as you might expect, the aerospace sector is going to have quite a tough time over the next number of months, I think. And then even Allstate in finance and insurance has announced redundancies as well, which is an unusual feature of this recession. So that's beginning to come through in the figures, and that's unfortunately something we expect to see more of in the next number of months. So in terms of the wider impacts, where are we now? We've gone back in time a bit, so we've reversed more than 2 decades of progress in terms of unemployment. So we've already passed the peak of the 2008 recession. So there are almost 70,000 people unemployed, and in 1 month we added 30,000 people to the unemployment register. So unemployment's more than doubled in 2 months, and unfortunately I think that's going to continue, and we can realistically see over 100,000 people unemployed in Northern Ireland in the near future. So things are going to get a little bit tougher, and it's unfortunate for those who are affected. In terms of youth unemployment, it had already begun to tick up in 2019. And as I said earlier, there's 25,000 kids going to leave the education system. So I would expect that to tick up and again, potentially get to 20-25% this year. So a significant youth unemployment challenge to deal with if those kids are to be helped through the labour market. So if they're in apprenticeships, if they're in additional education, or if they're honing their digital skills, all of those things are good relative to remaining in unemployment for a year or two. And the worry there is that if they're unemployed for a year or more, that they won't be able to get back into the labour market, and those scarring effects will impact on their lifelong chances. Again, mental health incidences have more than doubled over the period of the crisis. And again, younger people have been more affected. So if you're a pension age person, obviously the healthcare crisis is much more worrying for you, but the financial implications are probably a lot less because your income's fixed. Young people, the likelihood of getting jobs, um, much tougher to earn a reasonable salary, especially for those 16 to 24 age group. So again, younger people are less impacted in terms of the healthcare element of it, but more impacted in terms of the economic perspective. If we look at income inequality in education, again, we expect those that are probably the least well off in society to be hit hardest by the crisis as well. So they're the kids that are less likely to afford private tutoring. They're least likely to have a good quiet space to study, and they may also have quite a poor internet connection as well. There might be multiple devices connected, and they may not be the highest priority in the house as well. And if we look at scarring effects on young people, you've almost a 6% increase in being arrested if you leave school at the time of a recession. So, recessions, there is some evidence that they can increase the level of crime, and that's worrying because a lot of vulnerable young kids then can potentially be sort of lured into a life of crime and instead of work as well. So again, this is about opportunity and the ability to earn and risk-taking behaviour. So again, people have to believe it's worth investing in their education and trying to boost their chances in life over the future. So again, the risk of taking a higher income, earlier income piece, I think sometimes maybe trumps the longer term for some of the young kids. So again, toughest for the most vulnerable groups. So those who are young, those with low qualifications, low earners, and people who are in the gig economy, so part-timers or freelancers are going to find it quite tough. Again, those that are not digitally enabled or connected will find it tough because it's, again, the way that we're working and trading online really does need good quality, high-level internet connection. Those with caring responsibilities as well, so the level of flexibility that they have to re-enter the labour market and take employment. I think as employers, we need to look at how we make sure that there's flexible terms for people with caring responsibilities and try and help them back to work. Those that work in retail, manufacturing, tourism and entertainment, and then obviously share areas that have low shares of professional services or public sector employment could be hit hardest. So these were already the disadvantaged groups before the crisis, and these have really escalated the issues as we've gone forward. So as we look forward about how we build better, I think what we're going to need to do, we're going to need to dig in. So it's going to take a number of years to recover the lost ground. Normally, we would need to create about 4,000 jobs to maintain the unemployment rate as it is, as the population grows. And we need about 95 to 100,000 jobs to get back to full employment in Northern Ireland. So we've had a very, very significant shot in the arm from public spending, and lots of sectors are beginning to return to work now. But those crises bring opportunities. So what we've seen in terms of transformation, it's been pretty phenomenal at an economy-wide and institutional level. So, for instance, how many of us can work at home, and the things that we've all been told weren't possible as IT solutions have been really implemented within a couple of weeks. And there is an opportunity there to build back better. So realistically now, we've lost a number of years' ground in terms of unemployment, public finances. So those are significant steps back in time. But really, if you look at the labour market at the minute, we're looking at sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of stepping back in terms of progress so far. So we'd expect that maybe to deteriorate a little bit over the next number of months as the recession unfolds. So what we'd expect to see at a national level, and I think you've already seen some of this coming through, is that the UK government's going to act to try and boost consumption, business investment and exports. So again, you're going to see some VAT, income tax or other cuts to stimulate consumption, maybe even a stamp duty holiday, because the government's going to want people to buy houses and help prop up the market and stave off deflation. The guarantees, you could see credit guarantee extensions and all of that sort of stuff. And then also lurking in the background, we've got Brexit. So again, access to labour and markets is going to be key to the recovery. And the NI border protocol and all of those things are details that yet have to be thrashed out. So I think there'll be quite a bit of focus on that over the next 6 months. The medium term, again, fiscal recovery. So again, you've seen Boris Johnston say at the weekend that he's not going to return to 2009 style austerity. So low borrowing costs could help. But I think what you're going to see is, and the UK is already pretty focused on this, is things like competitiveness and boosting income. So how you grow the economy. So that's through R&D&I and infrastructure and enterprise. And then equality and sustainability. So how we share out that wealth. So regional levelling up, environmental sustainability, and inclusive growth are all on the policy agenda in the UK. Local, I think we need to make the most of the additional spending in 2021 and really sort of make use of that in terms of good projects, in terms of long-term infrastructure that will help the economy grow and help people get back to work. We do need to return to work safely and reasonably soon as possible. And we also need to return to growth. So that for us is a focus on competitiveness. So how do we invest in automation and digitization? How do we boost our infrastructure? How do we enable childcare support so that people can return to work? And then how do we focus on enterprise and employment? So how do we help people start up? How do we help them grow? And how do we support them in terms of engaging with the local supply chain? Again, Northern Ireland, so well-being and quality of life. So how do we deal with mental health issues and funding? So you've seen Siobhan O'Neill being appointed as a mental health czar for Northern Ireland, which is a great step forward. Again, supporting young vulnerable groups, so young people via education, apprenticeships and placements, and then those who are low qualified or in low wage employment in terms of training and upskilling, and those who are digitally excluded as well. So as we sort of close off on this, I think we all have a part to play. So businesses do need to invest and prepare for the upturn. The crisis will end, they always do. We need to think about cost cutting in the long term. So really have a think about what you do when you cut your spending, because your income is another person's spending and vice versa. So we need to think about what the impacts are in terms of how people spend their money and where they spend it. So again, think about spending locally and supporting small enterprises as they're the most vulnerable. Spare a thought for policy and decision makers. So the rapid responses are pretty much catch-all, but they're very blunt. And you've seen a criticism emerging really in terms of how that public money is used. Careful policy responses are certainly slower to deploy, but they're much more targeted and effective, and that's what you're going to see now coming out as responses are focused on those that are most in need. So every policy has a cost and budget. And again, whilst we have more money this year, all budgets are finite and it's not there next year to spend once we've spent it this year. So again, if companies are supported now, are they willing to pay more tax in the future to fund public services? Are they going to take someone into employment from the unemployment register or inactive? Are they going to fund an apprenticeship or co-design new qualifications? So again, it's about a partnership. It's about collaboration in terms of how we work to rebuild the economy in the future. So I think we all have to try and behave in a more normal mode, and that applies to us all if we want to return to normality. So hopefully that's the presentation through, and I'll take any questions that you have now.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have any questions from anyone? I have a first question, and then perhaps other people can have a thought. Richard, I've had, I suppose, quite a lot of companies coming, to the business school in regards to digital skills, and I've seen that you talked about the skills gap. How do you think that we can try to fulfill the, particularly, obviously there's loads of skills, but particularly the digital skills gap in a short period of time?
Yeah, I think that's a key challenge for Northern Ireland, because we're already a little bit behind in terms of digital skills. Fewer of our companies have automated, and fewer of them really have engaged in robotics, machine learning, or AI then across the piece. So that does negatively impact on our overall competitiveness. I think at the minute, we can certainly look at conversion courses from other degrees. You can look at short, sharp interventions in terms of like the digital learning type programs that can match by DFE. But again, at an individual level, there's also a responsibility there. If you think your digital skills aren't necessarily up to speed, those are the things that we would need to try and invest in for the future, because that is how we're going to work and live. So between the individual funding those types of courses in universities and colleges and schools, upskilling and increasing the number of courses and types of courses that are on offer, I think there's a good potential there to help the economy and a good market to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do we have any questions from anyone? Happy enough. Everyone's happy on a Monday. There's so much information, Richard, there that it's actually really, really interesting. And I think from, you know, a competitiveness and obviously from looking at the economy point of view, you know, there's obviously so many factors to be balanced in regards to thinking about responses. And I think that's obviously the challenge. But we do have a question. So asking, do we think that DFE's roadmap to recovery is sufficient? So the focus of closing gaps, clean energy and advanced engineering and life and health sciences were all the focus pre-COVID. So what do you think are the new elements in regards to their roadmap to recovery?
Yeah, I think that's really a first step on the road to recovery. So, you know, that's DFE's first plan. And I think what you'll see over the next number of months and years is that things will develop from that. Invest and I will also launch their recovery plans as well over the next couple of weeks, I'm sure. So that will take you more into the operational detail of how companies will be assisted by DFE. But like what's happened with COVID is that it's exacerbated already trends that were already there, and it's increased challenges that existed. So realistically, we're probably going to see more effort devoted to things that were already challenges. So we'll have more people who are digitally connected and enabled. That'll be one of the things that we need to focus on. We'll still have an aging population. We still have relatively low productivity. We still have relatively high inactivity. We still have too many people leaving school without education, without any form of skills or qualifications. So across the piece, I think those are all certainly things that we needed to deal with before the crisis. This has probably brought more focus onto those sorts of things. Now, I do think as we move forward, we're going to see much more focus in terms of youth unemployment and unemployment and inactivity type programs in the future. So as the labour market changes, I think you're going to see the policy framework change to try and sort of address these issues. So yeah, I think that's first step to recovery would be how I would put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you said, there's so many things to be balanced. I think it's a difficult job to really think of trying to close all those different gaps simultaneously and thinking of prioritization with the different areas. Okay, so I think we always like to keep it short anyway, and we don't really have any other questions today. I think you've dumbfounded them with all the statistics on a Monday morning, but I want to thank you again, Richard, for taking the time out and giving us these, updates every few weeks. They're really, really useful to understand how things are going on. So we have a few thanks there in the chat. So thank you. This will all be made available online for other people who have registered and weren't able to make it today. But thanks to everyone who joined us. And as I said, reach out if anyone wants to, have a chat about anything with the business school. So thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Bye.